Welcome back, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Jessica, I'm your moderator today, and we are in session 2, stream 3 with Miss Catherine Wallis. If you are looking for a different session, you'll be able to find all of the sessions in the menu on the left. Click on the session tab and then click on the session you're interested in attending. You will see a red live sign there. And without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce the speaker for today's session. It is Catherine Wallis. Catherine is a speaker and inspirational mentor to advocates and is an advocate for women who are coming out of abuse. She is going to share with us her personal story to inspire and encourage women of all ages to seek a life that they truly deserve. Catherine is a peer mentor volunteer now at the Women's Center in Oakville and is really known as a fierce champion of the underdog who is helping women fight shame and women that are reaching for help. Welcome, Catherine. We are so looking forward to your speech today.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. And as Jessica mentioned, I'm honored to be here to share my 2 experiences regarding domestic violence. I grew up in North Bay, Ontario, and like most teenage girls, I had a friend. I met him at the age of 17, and he was rather quiet. That was what attracted me to him, as I was the outgoing one. I'd go to his hockey games. He'd fly by me like Guy Lafleur, and my heart would flutter just to see him smile. On occasion, though, he would have outbursts of frustration and throw things. Hit a wall with his fist? Definitely not me. In 1980, we got married and moved down to Southern Ontario and began our new life together. After several years, it was time to start a family, and we were blessed with a son and daughter. I was a stay-at-home mom with them, and there was no place that I'd rather be. He was a good dad, a great father, and a hard worker, yet on occasion, drinking became an issue. Something seemed off, and I tried to communicate to understand about the change in his behavior. Previously losing 3 members of my family, my parents and my brother to suicide, within a 6-year period, I could never anticipate what was about to happen that would change the trajectory of our lives. It was the summer of 1997, and my girlfriend and I were attending a concert in Toronto. The children were taken to neighbors by my husband for a pool party. Upon arriving home later that night, I found him asleep on the couch in our family room. Trying to wake him up, he was so disgruntled. So I walked away and headed upstairs to bed. Within steps, I felt him grab the back of my hooded sweatshirt and begin to punch me in the face. Doing my best to cover myself, he continued to grab me and punch me more aggressively. Running straight ahead to the bathroom, he kicked the door down and came after me again. Then he walked up the stairs and left. Our son woke up and I was able to calm him down and put him back to bed. I was surprised that our daughter wasn't awake by the noise, or possibly she was so scared she just didn't move. He was gone, and I sat on the couch in my living room. My cheeks swollen, I cried and I was in shock. My heart sunk and I thought, how can this be happening to me? To us? Yeah, Kathy, you should call the police. I knew what the outcome would be. They'd arrest him. My husband and the father of our children. How was that going to play out? How long would he be gone? What would we do? What about our finances, our mortgage, the house? I'm frozen. stuck in playing the actress of a horror movie in a part I didn't audition for. About 20 minutes later, I called 911. Well, I sat, not able to move. Guess who comes driving back up the driveway? He's intoxicated and standing at the door, wanting to come in. I resisted to let him in fear of what might happen next. I was a mama bear protecting her cubs. 3 police cars arrived and escorted him into the cruiser. After a long conversation, they asked me if I wanted to charge him with assault. Do you know how difficult that was? He was a good father. He worked so hard. We'd known each other since we were teenagers. I made the difficult decision to move forward with this charge. I had no choice. It was made for me with the first punch. All I was told was that they'd taken him to the police station. The following day, he called me to say he was staying at his brother's. How did that happen exactly? Overnight in jail and then released? I tried so hard to convince him to go to counseling. It didn't work. He'd sit there for a bit, puff, and then leave. I sold the house, and the children and I moved back to Oakville. Even after that, I took him back, but I finally listened to that inner voice in my gut that said, enough. Reaching out for help was difficult, as any abused person knows. And the shelters, of course, they're all full. I became very familiar with several resources in my community, moved several times, and on one occasion, my daughter and I had all our belongings in the van, looking for somewhere to live. She was my strength. We had to be a team and do our best to thrive in a difficult situation. Fast forward to 2017, I share this is my second story. My children were grown now, and I'd been working in various ways to support myself and them. Healthcare, working for a law firm, retail, and even driving a school bus. Still moving around several times. I moved into a basement apartment with my landlord living upstairs. He was kind enough and owned his own moving company where I would work for him on occasion. At times, he would drink too much and be quite loud and obnoxious. We communicated often, and he shared with me that he'd lost 4 members of his family to a drunk driver. How horrific. Yep, you guessed it. Kathy to the rescue. I was going to help him with that pain, listen to his wounded heart, and save him. One evening, he invited me upstairs to watch the Gord Downing tribute. Oh, okay, I thought. What could hurt? Who was it going to be, though, tonight? Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde? We watched the show, had a few beer, and then its venom started to spew. Your kids spend way too much time in the shower when they stay over. I mean, like the water runs forever. I looked over. I mean, he was just singing a moment ago. What the hell happened? The fire in my belly started to burn. I mean, don't ever criticize a mama bear's children. Walking over to him as he sat with that arrogant smile on the couch, I pushed his shoulder, not even that hard, and said, don't ever speak to me that way about my children. As I started to walk away, he continued to talk and belittle me. I turned around and told him that I was going downstairs to my place. Turning around to close the door behind me with my back facing the stairs, he pushed me Falling backwards, I tried to grab hold of the railing, but my back hit the next level of stairs and then hitting my head on a concrete wall. Opening my eyes, I heard him close the door upstairs. I couldn't move. My back felt as though someone had lit a torch and peeled off the layer of my skin. Dragging myself across my apartment floor, I just kept saying, God, please help me. Please keep me alive. My children need me. Climbing up into my bed, my body was aching, and I finally called the police. Within a short period of time, I could hear the loud footsteps upstairs. All right, thank you, Lord, they're here. So like, when is someone coming to see me? Talk to me. Finally, a knock came on my door. It was a pretty paramedic who had a look at my back with her flashlight. You want to go to the hospital? I knew I should. But damn it, I knew the crisis nurse from when I worked there on the psych ward. Like, I don't need her to know about this. There it was, the shame, rising its ugly head to keep me from receiving the help I needed. Then my phone rang. Miss Wallis, it's a detective. I'm calling to let you know that your stories are completely different. We're coming to arrest you. You've been charged with assault. I couldn't even talk. I mean, you've got to be kidding me, I thought. I gathered my purse, headed out to the side of the house. There they were, all 3 police cruisers, just for me. The only trouble I'd ever been in was getting a speeding ticket. Now I felt like a criminal for a crime I didn't commit. Sitting in the back of the police cruiser in handcuffs, I cried continuously all the way to the station. He was also charged with assault, and later both of the charges were dropped. A peace bond had me involved in a group session with other women on a weekly basis, where I was commended for my participation and knowledge. We all have circumstances where we feel that we've been treated unfairly. Yet I ask you, where was the justice served in my case? From him being my landlord, he was able to remain in his residence and my life was disrupted. We need a system where the abuser can be investigated more thoroughly before being released. First responders should be required to not only evaluate, but insist on bringing an individual to the hospital. I have now healed, and I am a thriver, and I stand firm for every woman who needs to know she is strong and courageous, and I will continue to fight the good fight. Thank you so much. Does anyone have questions?
Thank you so much for that, Catherine.
Oh, you're very welcome.
So just a comment that came to mind when you were speaking and sharing there is can you elaborate more on the policing role sort of in the story that you had, just in terms of their role that they can play and how that could have been more proactively addressed?
Yes. So I felt, I mean, obviously they came to the house and they spoke to him first and then arrested him after that. But what was very frustrating to me was that he clearly struggled with alcoholism. I mean, that was very evident. And the fact that he was, the charges were dropped almost within a 24-hour period. There was no jail time. There didn't seem to be any justification for his behavior, which really, in my terms, is attempted murder. Had I, after the fall down 2 flights of stairs, hit my head on the concrete and been dead, that would have been a whole different scene. That being said, who would have known? So, looking at that individual, arresting them and then charging with assault based on the circumstances and then being released within 24 hours and a charge being dropped, that to me is that there's a loophole there.
Mm-hmm. And what you really mentioned something too that stood out to me is the paramedics when they were attending to your need. How do you think that could have been handled differently? And what, for the paramedics who are listening and any of the first responders who are joining us today, what would be a statement that your experience could communicate to them about how we can become more proactive in our positioning?
Thank you. And, not looping those professionals all into one group because it just depends on the particular individual. I was just rather surprised in my particular case that when she did arrive on the scene, she didn't ask me what happened. Mm-hmm. Now, possibly, she congregated at the front with the police. I don't know, but it was very casual. There wasn't really the immediate attention that I felt that I needed as far as trying to really persuade me to seek medical attention. There wasn't a lot of dialogue. It was very casual. So yeah, I feel that they need to be more proactive and assertive on behalf of the victim.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. That's incredibly brave of you to bring your story to us today and to help those that are in need and maybe facing situations that otherwise they wouldn't know would be considered abusive or would just think that this is sort of common nature or make excuses. Oh, it's just their way, when it's really not an okay way. So thank you very much for that, Catherine. And I want to invite anybody who is participating in our session today to type your questions in the chat box right within the viewing screen. The moderators cannot view the chat box in the main conference panel. So if you do want to ask Catherine a question or two, I certainly welcome you to do so, just typing it in the chat box window right underneath the screen where you can see us talking. And actually, I have a comment today from Frances, who's sharing with us that she has a similar story and that you're, in fact, the fourth woman who she knows that went through something very similar. And all of the women alike had felt so lost and victimized when the police came and took them away, when really they were the ones who were being victimized at the time. And so it does really, as we bring our voices together to help communicate the way that situations can be so easily spun, that there is more diligence needed and more questioning. And that stood out to me too, is that in the entire time, you were felt like, when will I be asked what happened? And when was I given a chance to say my side of the story? And when there is such a discrepancy, how can mediation take place in a different context? So we have a question now from Joanne. What helped you to actually reach out, and how can this message continue to be given to others?
Well, I actually went to Thrive Counseling in my community, and then got in touch with the Women's Center through a friend who was actually employed there at that time. So that was extremely helpful. I also would get together with a community of women. But maybe I can add this. When I had actually signed up to go to the Counseling Within Thrive community, there was a program, this was several years ago, there was going to be a workshop that was started for women going through abuse. The sign-up number was 200 women. When it actually came to the first workshop of that, they had to cancel it because they only had 6 women. And that was in the Oakville community alone. So, and I would just, if I can say and encourage and support, is that also there are people out there who know someone who's being abused. And it's so unfortunate that they will actually know that it's happened more than once and not act on it. You know, when are more people going to start to act on behalf of a friend, a family member, and do something about it?
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And Catherine, as somebody who really has had the courage and bravery to step out and move forward, what would you say to the women who may be in this, and men, women alike, who may be in this very situation, you know, in their regions, in their areas, and even right within the Oakville area? What would be a first step into I guess, overcoming the barrier of breaking that silence? And what would you recommend to them? Where could they go as a first place to move forward out of this position?
Well, it's numerous of places. I'm just thinking, reflecting personally, and now knowing the different resources that are there. It's the shame that binds us. So I mean, if it's only one person, right? Mm-hmm. Possibly you're involved in a church. Have a conversation with someone. Maybe it's not going to be a family member, because sometimes they're just too emotionally involved and they're just too close. So yeah, possibly someone at church, possibly a friend. There are other resources out there.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, and for any of those who are still watching, I encourage you as well, keep bringing your questions through the chat. We have Catherine for a few more minutes and certainly want to glean on her wealth of information and the bravery and courage that she is sharing with us today and imparting to us as a mentor of hope. And Catherine, what would you say for those who really are struggling with that position of shame, you know, having the idea in their mind, being in that position of, you know, oh, I don't want to shame someone else, but dealing with the shame of knowing, well, maybe I really have been abused and I feel like I'm the one to blame. What were some of the steps you took to actually embracing that and facing that gave you the courage to speak about it, to realize on the other side of it, there was actually no shame that you should have, because none of it was actually your fault? How do you bridge that gap of going from sort of one blinded place of pain to an empowered place of victory?
Well, if I can be as transparent to say that, during some of those difficult times, I am a woman of great faith, brought to my knees literally many times. And realizing that self-love was so important, and that there was nothing to be ashamed of, whether it's abuse or whether it's just life situations. How often does that plague us? And loving yourself and realizing how unique and very special that you are, and shame has no part of it. So I think, as I was mentioning before, even connecting with one individual, or now that we have technology, it might be a quick message to somebody at the other end of the line.
Excellent. And as this stream that we're in today is the very stream that's focusing on what causes silence. So in our series, this is the Learn Conference of how we learn, sort of where we're at. And one of the biggest barriers to our, ultimate success for change is learning where silence comes from, where it stems from. And shame obviously keeps us silent, and kind of causes fear to come in and prevent us from speaking. But what would you say in your experience were some of the factors that, if you could peel it back with your knowledge and wisdom now, what were some of the things that caused you to remain silent for as long as you did?
The stigma associated with domestic violence. So many other issues out there that people just don't want to talk about. And just feeling that I would be judged because of what had been done to me and what was going on in my life. Does that make me less of a person because my being has been violated and abused? No, it doesn't.
And would you say to that very point, during the process, we deal with a lot of survivors now who have taken that journey to regaining value and regaining their voice. What would you say that your experience did to your value system? And when was it that you realized that your value wasn't actually compromised? And actually, did you have a devaluing sense? You said you felt maybe that there was a stigma around what happened, but during that time, did you feel of less value? And how did you gain that value back?
Good question. When you're going through that, as we know, different terminology, trauma bonding, gaslighting, I ended up in as you heard my story, a second abusive situation. And it wasn't until I stepped back and I thought, is this me? Is this the life that I am living? Why do I not think more of myself than this? How did I get here? At times it was like, it wasn't even my life, but it was my life. And then once again, coming back to myself, to my own heart, and realizing that I was just not going to do this anymore. And I needed to love myself enough to reach out to somebody and that validation that we all need, right? Mm-hmm. We're all looking to be loved. And the situation of abuse is certainly not that.
Well, again, I commend you on sharing the candidness of the journey, because it is unique to every survivor, yet we share a lot of the same experiences in emotion and affect to our being in that. But the wonderful thing is the hope that we get to impart and share on the other side of it with brave ones like you who lead the way for us. So, Catherine, what would you say to your younger self, that young woman in North Bay who hadn't experienced the kinds of things that you had, and going into, the ideal looking life, thinking everything was going to be wonderful ahead of you, and not even having a clue of what could just come to you without your expectation? What would you say to her now, having the wisdom that you have?
You've touched my heart there. So when you're mentioning that about being a teenager, I was a pregnant teen as well at the age of 16 and gave a child up for adoption. But what I would say is, at that time when we're teenage girls, we can, they're so judgmental, so petty. I would say surround yourself with girls who've got you,
Mm.
who love to laugh, who love to have fun, who can be themselves, who are transparent, and know that you can do anything that you want in this world and in this life, and know and understand how special and truly unique that you are.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And you mentioned as well that you had children who were really fleeing your first experience and then were kind of subjected to your second abusive experience. And what was the impact that this held on them? A lot of times, you know, we heard earlier today from Mary Shala how her young child was impacted and her other children were impacted. And a lot of times, sometimes we as survivors are doing everything we can just to survive and to thrive and to pull through. And we do our best for those that are around us, especially little ones. But sometimes there isn't always a proactive ability to address the emotional needs or the psychological effects at the moment. And what was the impact for your children in this experience, and how did you navigate that with them?
Great question again. So my children were 9 and 6 at the time, boy and a girl. And with the incident with their father, as I mentioned in the story, there were some signs prior to my marriage, but after this one major incident had happened, it was completely out of character for him. And even though I took the children and moved, he was the kind of father that was still very in touch with them. So I didn't have a situation where he was all of a sudden out of the picture. So obviously setting my personal boundaries and making sure that boundaries were healthy for them. But they have a great relationship with him now. And also, I would say to anybody who's listening that has a similar situation as mine with a parent was, I never belittled their father verbally in front of them. I didn't choose to do that. What I did choose to do was to forgive him. That, and also forgive myself. It took a while. It took quite a long time. But in order for me to truly heal, that was what I had to do.
Very good. Well, thank you for that. That's welcome. Powerful. And as a parent, for any parents that may be out there now, and hopefully you're not encountering this cycle with your own children after all of you have learned from this experience. But as a parent, you know, reflecting back on your younger self as well, and now you having gone through this experience, for parents that are out there, or if you were to begin to identify that maybe there was some uncommon behavior in your child's life or in a relationship that they were in, what would you say, or how would you build safeguards in? What kind of conversation would you open up to create a place of safety for those that you care for that may be entering into an abusive relationship or in abusive relationships that is maybe undetected so far? How would you, you know, even being in a role of a mentor right now, not so much as close as a parent, but how would you offer that place of safety or gently open that conversation?
So I think with respect to children, I mean, our behaviors are modeled in our home, right? Self-respect, respect for others. With regards to, you know, abusive relationship, I mean, teaching children, you know, what signs to look for, verbal abuse. And truly, you know, boundaries are just so important. And also, you know, as far as I'm sorry, you were mentioning about, can you ask me that again, that second part?
Yes, just as a mentor or as somebody in a position of authority or guidance or oversight for younger ones, how would you bridge that gap or open the lines of communication to someone who really does, would have benefited? Like if your younger self had a parent who could identify the signs and spoke into your life with words of wisdom to say, hey, this could be a dangerous situation. Maybe that could have prevented you from walking in naively. And so if you're in that place of empowerment as a parent, as a mentor, how do you, bring up the young ones or offer them a safe place to say, hey, this could be happening and here's how we can prevent it? Or like you said, keep your eye open for this. But how have you, or how will you, or do you want to see this type of conversation able to be had?
Well, I think open communication is so important, right? And letting them know that, once again, it's like if there's something that doesn't feel right, if there's something you need to discuss with someone, depending on how they're speaking to you or the behavior, that you need to reach out to someone, right? And speak to someone.
And was there anyone in your life, a lot when I communicate with survivors, there's always that place of real emotional turmoil. And you touched to that specifically in your first relationship where, this was your husband, this was the father of your children, this was the provider and the partner in life. And, part of my world is also going to be crumbling as I begin to walk this journey forward. And how do you, and what advice do you have to speak to it, especially young women who are in that emotional state of, we really get blinded by love and very attached. And sometimes it's very difficult to separate the heart of the emotion from the heart of the matter. And the matter is very different from the emotion. And that can sometimes be a very difficult enmeshment to break apart. But for our safety's sake and our lives, that can sometimes be the very thing that has to happen. And what would you say to that? And how would you speak to someone who may be battling with the emotional trauma of letting go?
Well, first and foremost, I'd say listen to that inner voice. As you were saying, you can be in love and yet there's situations or things being said to you that you feel is just not quite right. Also, there may be a friend that's pointing something out to you, right? And we tend to kind of push that aside and say, oh, well, I don't really want to listen to that. It's important that you listen to that, right? Because those who love you, we may not always like what they have to say, but they're usually the first ones that can see outwardly what is happening, that they sense it isn't quite right. And that's so important because that can mean the difference between sometimes the survival mode, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's very good. And I think overall, many of the things that I've pulled out of your presentation is certainly to have a great support system and a group of people who are for you and with you and willing to walk the journey no matter what it looks like. A good friend is there in the high and the low, but knowing that you have good people in supporting you through whatever the journey looks like is key. And also I hear you saying, listen to the inner voice, listen to what is true. And sometimes when that's lost, really pushing through to remember who you really are and that you are worth it and you are valuable.
Most definitely.
Excellent. Most definitely. Well, I want to give the opportunity to the audience one last time. Any questions that anybody might have, specifically for Catherine, her experience, how you can get in touch with her or find out more about what she's doing, please, you're welcome to type into the chat. And we'll give that just another 30 more seconds. And following that, we will go into our next break. We really appreciate you, Catherine. Thank you so much for being willing to come on today with us and walk with us in the first stages of our journey about how we can learn the things that cause silence and how we can break them and to build community like you're talking about. And we very much appreciate the hope and the mentorship. Once again, anybody that is watching, Catherine is a peer mentor and volunteer with the Women's Center in Oakville. And Catherine, some are asking from the chat, how can they get in touch with you if they would like to connect, either from a guidance perspective or perhaps for speaking engagements, or even if they'd like to pursue you as a mentor or peer friend?
Well, I think that the first way to contact me would be just through my email. If I can I say that?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay. So that would be Catherine Wallis 62@gmail.com.
Okay. 62. I'm going to type it in the chat for everybody. So Catherine Wallis 62@gmail.com.
Beautiful. That's correct. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So I have that. I'm going to put that up in the chat for everybody to see in just one moment. And here we go. And there we have it. And I think the gmail.com might have actually gotten cut off, but everybody can know that. Catherine Wallis 62@gmail.com. Well, I want to thank you once again, Catherine, so much for your time today. We hope to that you'll be part of our participants going forward for our next conferences, and to come alongside us in the journey as we continue to break silence and build communities. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.